So, quality of life improvements. Always an improvement? I'm not so sure. I'm sure all of you played World of Warcraft at some point, and some of you will have noticed how it changed with each new expansion, and for most of you, there was a point where you bailed, right? And I think it wasn't entirely due to life getting in the way for many of you. So some time ago, I checked out the re-release of World of Warcraft Classic for a bit, and then I checked out the current expansion, and what's striking about the Switch is the way all the myriad of quality of life improvements transformed the core game experience, right? Now, I've come to believe that low quality of life was a core mechanic of the original World of Warcraft. Like, it wasn't fun the way other games are fun, right? It was more like work, and the rewards you got, like items, level ups, etc., were what made it fun. There was barely any skill involved, still isn't, and I'm talking about dexterity and stuff. And time to kill, even for ordinary enemies, was way high if you juxtapose it with what you were actually doing when you're fighting. And traveling was an ordeal at times, and so on. So it's only natural that players would want some relief from that stuff, right? So bit by bit, they got quality of life improvements until the game was barely recognizable. It's like one of those plastic surgery addicts, right? The ones that look like they switch genres from human being to ogre. Then there's also probably an issue with people changing their play schedules, not being able to spend as much time on the game and all that. Which, life getting in the way, but it's the developer trying to keep those people in the game. The thing is, in World of Warcraft, the constraints on the player were so transparent. It's easy to just go, why do I have to go to a teacher to learn any given skill? Why do I have to find another teacher for the same profession? Why do I have to use the chat to find a group? Why can't I just get teleported into the dungeon? It's instanced anyway, right? Why can't I play Shaman on the Alliance side? And the answer is usually to make the game world more coherent and convincing and immersive. On playing WoW Classic, I've come to think that any change they made that took away from the game world, that made it less immersive, was probably a bad move, brackets, for my tastes. So that's Annoyances contributing to the atmosphere of the game world. And retail WoW is fine, I guess. It's just a completely different game, right? So for some more examples, Kingdom Come Deliverance. Fantastic game. Very authentic medieval RPG. It has an alchemy system that works like this. So you have to use an alchemy station. There's different base ingredients. That's oil, water, and alcohol or something. You pour that in a pot or a cauldron, and you use the bellows to bring it up to temperature. And that can be different stages, like simmer and boil, and you put in different ingredients which you may grind up beforehand or not depending on the recipe, and then you have an hourglass that you can turn to measure the cooking time, and you have a recipe book that you have to check to make sure you're following the recipe, and you do all those actions in the actual 3D game world, not even in like a UI interface or something. Now, you could make all of that less awkward and less time-consuming, but that's the point, right? It's not just a matter of gathering the ingredients, it's also a matter of cooking them up correctly. It's all part of the process. And there are skills you can learn to make like multiples of a potion at once and stuff, but your character has to earn that first, right? So I thought that stuff was beautifully immersive. All right, what else? Point-and-click adventures. Remember those? Now, I'm not a massive fan of point-and-click adventures or anything, but I do remember the user interface being very different from what they're like now. In Maniac Mansion and the like, you had a little paragraph's worth of interaction verbs at your disposal, and you had to try until you found the one that works with the given object. Nowadays, it's all context-sensitive, since those verbs before were really just subcategories of use and look at or comment on, right? So you have like interact and info, if anything. But finding the right sort of way to tell your character what to do was a mechanic in itself, right? In a meta way, the awkwardness was part of it. It did make sense to get rid of that, though, if you saw the extra verbs as redundant. Maybe you could draw a comparison to those kind of comedy games where the awkwardness of the controls is central to the gameplay. Like this one web game I made called Double Hitler. So another example, Gothic. That's Gothic 1 and 2 specifically. That's another game which I should really review, or maybe I have reviewed it. by the time this video goes out. So there are no map markers, no HUD markers for where to go. You have to buy a map and pull it out and look at it. But there is a little arrow to show your position, so they didn't go fully hardcore. Also, there's no quest trackers. And quests aren't formulaic anyway in that game. Like, they're all integrated into the game world. Like, in those games, the game world and what you're doing in it are so intertwined that it would almost seem off if it was full of those quality of life improvements, right? And then again, inventory space is infinite, so that's weird, but, you know, compromises, I guess. Now, an interesting aspect of this whole annoyances as game design thing is the effect of annoyances on the pace of the game, which is a big deal. So in my game, Slashers Keep, I wrote the world generation script in such a way that the rooms of the dungeon are arranged randomly on a grid, and then corridors are laid out all around the rooms. Later I organized them a bit more deliberately, but in general it remained quite random. And that made the path the player would have to take pretty random and led to a fair bit of backtracking, right? What I found, though, was that fact naturally regulated the pace of the game. So you would have fairly reasonable downtimes between moments of excitement. And the inventory management is another contributor to that, I think. I could have had like an infinite inventory or one where all the items use up a single tile, but that would have removed that aspect from the game completely. Though really the reason I made multi-tile items was for immersion. I just like to see my belongings represented as objects rather than abstract symbols, you know. So how do we break this whole topic down? Is annoyance just a low fidelity type of obstacle, meaning something that is not complex in terms of game mechanics or may not even require applying the main mechanics of the game to overcome? Maybe that's why it feels annoying sometimes. Like it's a distraction from what you were doing at the time. Maybe I'm completely wrong about the benefits of annoyances as game design, and every aspect of every game should always be pleasant. Maybe it depends on the player, whether or not they can endure an arduous journey so that they can appreciate the reward at the end. So, something to think about when considering quality of life improvements. And this is something players may not want to hear, but your players don't always know what's best for them. And speaking of video games, I have a video game out on Steam. Slashers Keep is a first-person roguelike with a focus on melee combat and loot. It has randomly generated dungeons with orcs, mole rats, and other monsters to fight, lots of loot to find, and a drag-and-drop weapon crafting system. I made it all by my lonesome, and it's available for PC on Steam.